The evolution of spacecraft and satellites. Outer space, the final frontier. But how did humanity first breach Earth's atmosphere? From the Cold War-fueled launch of Sputnik to the futuristic vision of Mars colonize, the evolution of spacecraft and satellites is one of the most remarkable chapters in science and engineering. This video takes you deep into that journey from science fiction to reality, laying the foundations. Before rockets ever roared skyward, visionaries built the science. In 1903, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky's rocket equation calculated the velocity needed to escape Earth's pull, giving us the mathematics behind every launch. In 1928, Hermann Potschnik, in The Problem of Space Travel, described orbital stations and geostationary satellites, decades before they became reality. In 1945, Arthur C. Clarke proposed satellites at 35,786 km altitude to serve as global communication relays, today's telecom backbone. First steps into space. Sputnik 1, or sometimes referred to as simply Sputnik, was the first artificial Earth satellite. A polished metal sphere 58 cm wide, weighing 83 kilograms. Launched by the Soviet Union under Sergei Golarov's leadership, its radio beeps were heard worldwide. It was launched into an elliptical low Earth orbit by the Soviet Union on 4 October 1957 as part of the Soviet space program. It sent a radio signal back to Earth for 3 weeks before its 3 silver zinc batteries became depleted. Aerodynamic drag caused it to fall back into the atmosphere on 4 January 1958. January 31, 1958. The US answered with Explorer 1. Explorer 1 was the first satellite launched by the United States and was part of the US participation in the International Geophysical Year (IGY). The mission follows the first 2 satellites both launched by the Soviet Union during the previous year, Sputnik 1 and Sputnik 2. This began a space race during the Cold War between the two nations. Explorer 1 was the first spacecraft to detect the Van Allen radiation belt, returning data until its batteries were exhausted after nearly 4 months. It remained in orbit until 1970. November 3, 1957. Sputnik 2 carried Laika, the first living creature in orbit, paving the way for human spaceflight. Laika was a Soviet space dog who was one of the first animals in space, and the first to orbit the Earth. She flew aboard the Sputnik 2 spacecraft, launched into low orbit as the technology to re-enter the atmosphere had not yet been developed. Laika's survival was never expected. She died of hyperthermia hours into the flight on the craft's 4th orbit. April 12, 1961. Yuri Gagarin aboard Vostok 1 and became the first human in space, orbiting Earth once in 108 minutes. The Vostok 1 was the first space flight of the Vostok program and the first human orbital space flight in history. The Vostok 3Ka space capsule was launched from Baikonur Cosmodrome on 12 April 1961. With Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin aboard, making him the first human to reach orbital velocity around the Earth and to complete a full orbit around the Earth. The orbital spaceflight consisted of a single orbit around the Earth which skimmed the upper atmosphere at 169 kilometers. At its lowest point, the flight took 108 minutes from launch to landing. Gagarin parachuted to the ground separately from his capsule after ejecting at 7 km 23,000 feet altitude. February 20, 1962. John Glenn aboard Friendship 7 proved that human could work in orbit. Project Mercury was America's first human spaceflight program. The Space Task Group at NASA's Langley Research Center in Hampton, Virginia, under the direction of Robert R. Gilroth, initiated the project in October 1958 with 3 goals: orbiting a manned spacecraft, investigating man's ability to function in space, and safely recovering both spacecraft and crew member. In April 1959, NASA announced the selection of 7 astronauts who would undertake the Mercury missions. After some early launch failures, the first successful unpiloted test of the single-seat spacecraft took place in December 1960, launched into a suborbital flight atop a Redstone rocket. A similar flight a month later carried Ham, a chimpanzee. Astronaut Alan B. Shepard completed the first American spaceflight on May 5, 1961, a 15-minute suborbital mission aboard his Freedom 7 capsule. Virgil I. Gauss Grissom flew a similar mission on July 21 aboard Liberty Bell 7, the first successful unpiloted orbital Mercury flight using the more powerful Atlas rocket flew in September 1961, followed by the two-orbit flight of chimpanzee Enos on November 29. The next step was to fly an astronaut on an orbital mission. July 20, 1969, Apollo 11 landed on the Moon. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked its surface while Michael Collins orbited above. Apollo 11 was a spaceflight conducted from July 16 to 24, 1969 by the United States and launched by NASA. It marked the first time that human landed on the Moon. Commander Neil Armstrong and lunar model pilot Buzz Aldrin landed the lunar model Eagle on July 20, 1969 at 20.17 UTC, which is Coordinated Universal Time. And Armstrong became the first person to step onto the Moon's surface 6 hours and 39 minutes later. On July 21 at 2:56 UTC, Aldrin joined him 19 minutes later, and they spent above 2.25 hours together, exploring the site they had named Tranquility Base upon landing. Armstrong and Aldrin collected 47.5 pounds, 21.5 kilograms of lunar material to bring back to Earth, as pilot Michael Collins flew the command model Columbia in lunar orbit, and were on the Moon's surface for 21 hours 36 minutes before lifting off to rejoin Columbia. Moon landing debate. The moon landing sparked conspiracy theories. Skeptics pointed to the absence of stars in photos and flags movement. Experts countered that daylight on the moon outshines starlight in camera, and the flag's rippling came from inertia in a vacuum. Reflectors left by Apollo astronauts still return laser signals to Earth, proving they were there. Expanding horizon. Satellite milestones. Telstar, the first live TV satellite, launched July 10, 1962 by AT&T's Bell Labs in partnership with NASA, aboard a Thor Delta rocket. A spherical satellite, 34.5-inch diameter and 171 pounds, powered by solar panels, transmitted the first live transatlantic television broadcast on July 23, 1962, featuring CBS's Walter Cronkite, NBC's Chet Huntley, and BBC's Richard Dimbleby. Visuals included the Statue of Liberty and the Eiffel Tower. A baseball clip from the Phillies vs. Cubs made the cross too. Operated for just 7 months before running into radiation issues from the Starfish Prime nuclear test. Landsat 1, Eyes on Earth, launched July 23, 1972 as ERTS-1, Earth Resources Technology Satellite, later renamed to Landsat 1. Purpose-built to monitor Earth's resources, agriculture, forestry, geology, water cartography, and more. Carried both an RBV camera and multispectral scanner MSS. Captured over 100,000 images covering 75% of Earth's surface before retiring in early 1978. The system has become the longest-running Earth imaging record, aiding environmental science, climate monitoring, and land use planning. The GPS satellite navigation revolution. The GPS project was started by the US Department of Defense in 1973. The first prototype spacecraft was launched in 1978, and the full constellation of 24 satellites became operational in 1993. After Korean Airlines Flight 007 was shut down when it mistakenly entered Soviet airspace, President Ronald Reagan determined that the GPS system would be made available for civilian use as of 1988. However, initially this civilian use was limited to an average accuracy of 100 meters by use of selective availability (SA), a deliberate error introduced into the GPS data that military receivers could correct for. GPS relies on trilateration, using signal travel time from multiple satellites. Atomic clocks aboard ensure precise timing, down to nanoseconds. Space Shuttle Columbia. Reusability takes off April 12, 1981. First launched from the Kennedy Space Center, STS-1 marked the debut of the Space Shuttle era. Over its 30-year service, the shuttle fleet deployed instruments like Hubble, surface satellites, and assembled the International Space Station, making orbit routine. However, disasters like Challenger in 1986 and Columbia in 2003 underscored spaceflight's inherent risks and drove home the need for safety vigilance. Modern marvels and a new space age. Modern private spaceflight and space mission. Blue Origin. Jeff Bezos founded Blue Origin in 2000 with the vision of enabling millions of people to live and work in space. The company quietly developed reusable vertical takeoff, vertical landing rockets, notably New Shepard, and began building toward orbital capabilities like New Glenn. SpaceX founded. Elon Musk founded Space Exploration Technologies, or SpaceX, in 2002, aiming to lower spaceflight costs and enable Mars colonization. Its early milestones included being the first private company to launch and return spacecraft from orbit and to dock with the International Space Station. First Falcon 9 landing. SpaceX achieved the first ever vertical soft landing of rockets' first stage Falcon 9 on December 21, 2015, a major breakthrough in reusability. Starlink Mega Constellation. Since 2019, SpaceX Starlink constellation has rapidly grown to deliver high-speed, low-latency internet worldwide, including remote regions, with services now available in over 115 countries of July 2025. India's Chandrayaan-3 near South Pole landing. On August 23, 2023, India's Chandrayaan-3 achieved a historic soft landing near the moon's south pole, becoming the first nation to land there. China's Tianwen-1 Mars mission. On July 23, 2020, Tianwen-1 launched, arriving at Mars by February 2021. It carried a rover, lander, and orbiter, making China the first to orbit, land, and rover in one mission. The rover deployed on 22-23 of May, making China the third nation to make soft landing and establish communication from the Martian surface, after the Soviet Union and the United States. James Webb Space Telescope. Launched on December 25, 2021, aboard an Ariane 5 from the French Guiana. James Webb Space Telescope reached its position at L2 Lagrange point 1.5 million km from Earth, rolling out its sun shield and mirrors. It began its mission to explore the early universe. It's expected to operate for up to 20 years and has already delivered breathtaking observations of early galaxies and exoplanets like TWA 7b, 25 and beyond, future frontiers. NASA's Artemis 3 aims to land the first woman and first person of color on the moon's south pole by 2026. Lunar Gateway will serve as a staging point for lunar and Mars missions. SpaceX Starship, the most powerful rocket ever built, aims to carry crews to Mars, testing long-duration life support and resource use. The dream sustainable lunar bases, Martian habitats, and beyond. From a tiny beeping sphere in 1957 to the possibility for human footsteps on Mars, our journey into space reflects the best of human curiosity and engineering. The sky is not the limit, it's just the beginning. Thank you for watching. See you next time.